Welcome to Iraqi Dinar News, where you receive real and authentic updates about the Iraqi dinar. If you want to stay informed with moment-by-moment developments, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Today we are taking a closer look at a statement that has generated considerable discussion within the Iraqi dinar community. The comment suggests that a one-to-one exchange rate between the Iraqi dinar and the US dollar could serve as a starting point, with speculation that market supply and demand might eventually support a value of $1.10, $1.15, or even $1.20 per Iraqi dinar. While statements like these often attract attention, it is important to separate opinion from official policy and analyze the topic through the lens of economics, monetary policy, and financial markets. Whenever discussions about potential exchange rates emerge, investors and currency followers naturally become interested because exchange rate changes can significantly affect trade, investment, government finances, and economic confidence. However, it is equally important to remember that opinions expressed by commentators are not official announcements from the Central Bank of Iraq or the Iraqi government. The official value of the Iraqi dinar is determined through monetary policy decisions, economic conditions, and the actions of Iraq's financial authorities, rather than predictions made by analysts or public personalities. The suggestion that one-to-one could be a starting point reflects a belief held by some market observers that Iraq possesses substantial economic resources capable of supporting a stronger national currency over the long term. Iraq remains one of the world's largest oil-producing countries, and its economy continues to rely heavily on petroleum exports. Revenue generated from oil sales provides the government with foreign currency reserves that help stabilize the banking system and finance public spending. Supporters of a stronger Iraqi dinar frequently point to several economic developments. These include ongoing banking sector modernization, efforts to digitize financial services, improvements in anti-money laundering controls, expansion of electronic payment systems, increased international cooperation, and reforms designed to strengthen Iraq's financial infrastructure. They argue that these reforms lay the foundation for greater confidence in Iraq's economy over time. At the same time, professional financial analysis requires recognizing that currency valuation depends on far more than natural resources or public optimism. Exchange rates reflect productivity, inflation, fiscal discipline, political stability, investor confidence, foreign exchange reserves, trade balances, monetary policy, and international capital flows. Every one of these factors contributes to how a country's currency is valued relative to others. When discussing the possibility of the Iraqi dinar reaching parity with the US dollar or moving beyond it, it is useful to understand what supply and demand actually mean in currency markets. Every currency is affected by the willingness of individuals, businesses, banks, and governments to buy or sell it. If demand for a currency consistently exceeds supply, upward pressure on its value may develop. Conversely, if supply exceeds demand, downward pressure can occur. However, supply and demand do not operate independently of central bank policy. The Central Bank of Iraq actively manages the country's monetary system, oversees foreign exchange operations, and seeks to maintain financial stability. Major changes in exchange rate policy are typically introduced carefully because sudden movements can affect inflation, imports, exports, government budgets, and household purchasing power. This is why experienced economists generally caution against assuming that market enthusiasm alone could produce dramatic currency appreciation overnight. Even countries with strong economies usually experience gradual adjustments in exchange rates rather than immediate and substantial changes. Another point worth examining is the reference to widespread anticipation within the Iraqi dinar community. There is no doubt that many people around the world closely follow Iraqi economic developments. For years, investors have monitored banking reforms, legislative changes, oil production, international partnerships, and monetary policy decisions in hopes of understanding Iraq's long-term economic direction. That level of attention certainly demonstrates continued global interest in Iraq's economy. Nevertheless, interest from investors does not automatically translate into changes in official exchange rate policy. Financial markets respond primarily to measurable economic data and confirmed policy actions rather than expectations alone. Looking at Iraq's broader economic picture provides additional context. The country continues working to diversify its economy beyond oil revenues. Government initiatives have emphasized agriculture, manufacturing, transportation, logistics, tourism, renewable energy, and digital transformation. Diversification remains important because economies heavily dependent on a single commodity can experience greater volatility when global commodity prices fluctuate. Higher oil prices generally strengthen Iraq's fiscal position by increasing export revenues and supporting foreign currency reserves. Lower oil prices can create budgetary pressure and reduce government income. Therefore, maintaining a balanced economy remains one of Iraq's long-term policy objectives. Banking reform also deserves attention. Iraqi authorities have implemented measures intended to modernize payment systems, improve regulatory oversight, strengthen compliance standards, and encourage greater participation in the formal financial sector. These reforms are significant because efficient banking systems support investment, facilitate commerce, and improve confidence among domestic and international businesses. Financial transparency has become another important area of focus. Stronger compliance with international financial standards can improve Iraq's reputation within global banking networks. Enhanced transparency may encourage greater foreign investment by reducing uncertainty and increasing confidence in the country's financial institutions. Foreign direct investment represents another factor influencing long-term currency strength. Investors considering projects in infrastructure, manufacturing, energy, telecommunications, and technology typically evaluate political stability, regulatory consistency, contract enforcement, and economic outlook before committing capital. A stable investment environment can contribute positively to economic growth over time. Inflation is equally important. Central banks worldwide attempt to balance economic growth with price stability. If inflation remains under control, purchasing power is better preserved. Stable inflation can strengthen confidence in a nation's currency and reduce economic uncertainty. Excessive inflation, by contrast, tends to weaken currencies because purchasing power declines. Government fiscal discipline also plays a major role. Responsible budgeting, sustainable debt management, efficient public spending, and prudent revenue management contribute to long-term macroeconomic stability. Investors generally favor countries demonstrating consistent fiscal responsibility. The comment suggesting values above 1-to-1 relies heavily on the concept of demand exceeding supply. In theory, currencies can appreciate when demand rises. However, the actual magnitude of appreciation depends on numerous economic variables. Exchange rates rarely move solely because market participants expect them to do so. Instead, sustained appreciation generally reflects underlying improvements in economic fundamentals. For Iraqi dinar followers, the key takeaway is that meaningful currency appreciation, if it were ever to occur, would likely be supported by measurable progress across multiple areas. These include continued banking reform, economic diversification, fiscal stability, strong foreign reserves, moderate inflation, growing investor confidence, and successful implementation of government reform programs. It is also important to distinguish between market speculation and official communication. Investors should pay close attention to announcements issued directly by Iraq's monetary authorities, government institutions, and internationally recognized financial organizations, rather than relying exclusively on commentary circulating through social media or online discussions. Short-term market sentiment can fluctuate significantly whenever optimistic projections become popular. News reports, interviews, conference discussions, and analyst opinions often influence expectations within investor communities. However, expectations alone do not constitute confirmed policy. Long-term economic development remains a more reliable indicator. If Iraq continues strengthening its institutions, expanding private sector activity, improving infrastructure, and integrating more deeply into regional and international markets, these developments could enhance overall economic resilience. Stronger economic fundamentals generally create more favorable conditions for currency stability. Another consideration involves international trade. A country's exchange rate influences both imports and exports. Policymakers often seek a balance that supports economic competitiveness while preserving domestic purchasing power. Excessively rapid currency appreciation could affect export competitiveness, while excessive depreciation could increase import costs and inflation. Central banks therefore typically evaluate exchange rate policy within the broader context of national economic objectives. These objectives may include employment, inflation control, financial stability, sustainable growth, and competitiveness. Foreign currency reserves represent another important safeguard. Adequate reserves enable central banks to manage exchange rate volatility and maintain confidence during periods of economic uncertainty. Iraq's reserve position has often been cited as one of the country's financial strengths. Although reserve levels naturally fluctuate over time based on economic conditions and policy decisions, confidence itself deserves careful discussion. Confidence influences investment, consumption, lending, and business expansion. When businesses believe economic conditions are improving, they may hire additional workers, invest in equipment, and expand production. Households may increase spending, while international investors may evaluate new opportunities. Yet confidence is built gradually through consistent policy implementation. Markets generally reward predictability, transparency, and institutional credibility more than isolated optimistic forecasts. For viewers following the Iraqi dinar, patience and critical thinking remain valuable. Headlines predicting dramatic currency changes often generate excitement, but responsible analysis requires evaluating the evidence supporting those claims. Financial markets have repeatedly demonstrated that long-term outcomes depend on sustained economic performance rather than short-term enthusiasm. The reference to everyone waiting for the Iraqi dinar to explode reflects emotional sentiment rather than measurable economic analysis. Professional economists generally avoid describing currency markets in those terms because exchange rates are influenced by complex interactions among domestic policy, international trade, capital flows, interest rates, inflation expectations, and geopolitical developments. That does not mean optimism should be dismissed. Iraq has made progress in several reform areas, and continued improvements could strengthen economic fundamentals over time. However, optimism is most valuable when grounded in observable developments rather than assumptions. Investors should also recognize that exchange rate policy involves careful consideration of domestic economic conditions. Policymakers evaluate how changes could affect businesses, consumers, banks, exporters, importers, government finances, and overall financial stability. From a risk management perspective, diversification remains an important principle for anyone interested in financial markets. Concentrating expectations on a single scenario or prediction can expose investors to unnecessary uncertainty. Balanced decision-making generally involves considering multiple economic outcomes. Looking ahead, Iraqi dinar followers may wish to monitor several indicators. These include official statements from the Central Bank of Iraq, government economic reforms, inflation trends, foreign reserve data, banking modernization initiatives, foreign investment announcements, oil market developments, and broader macroeconomic performance. Each of these indicators provides tangible information that can help observers better understand Iraq's economic trajectory. Together, they offer a more comprehensive picture than any single forecast or opinion. Ultimately, whether the Iraqi dinar experiences significant appreciation in the future will depend on real economic progress, effective policymaking, sustained institutional reform, and evolving global market conditions. Currency valuation is the result of a complex economic process rather than a single event. Therefore, while comments suggesting values above 1-to-1 certainly encourage discussion within the Iraqi dinar community, they should be viewed as personal opinions rather than confirmed financial outcomes. Responsible analysis always distinguishes between speculation and official policy. For long-term followers of Iraq's economy, the most constructive approach is to continue monitoring verified economic data and confirmed policy developments. Iraq's banking reforms, infrastructure investment, fiscal management, private sector expansion, and efforts to diversify beyond oil will likely remain among the most important themes influencing the country's economic future. As global investors continue watching Iraq's progress, transparency and reliable information become increasingly valuable. Financial decisions should always be based on careful research, multiple credible sources, and an understanding of both opportunities and risks. That brings us to the end of today's analysis. If you appreciate responsible, factual, and balanced coverage of Iraqi dinar developments and Iraq's economy, Be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video so you never miss future updates. Thank you for watching. And remember that this content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. It should not be considered financial, investment, or trading advice, and viewers should conduct their own research or consult a qualified financial professional before making any investment decisions.